It looks like colder trends and an active storm track are setting up for Thanksgiving week and right into the early part of December. We're going to tackle Thanksgiving week first, and then we'll dive into December. Hey everyone, my name is Mitch, and happy Monday morning to you. I hope you're all doing awesome out there. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like the video if you enjoy it, and if there's anything at all I can pray about for you, please drop it in the comments below. Let's get this show on the road this morning and talk about temperatures first. I'm going to kick things off with Monday morning, November the 24th. So we're pretty much going to fast forward through this upcoming week, which I think is just going to be dominated by a lot of warm air, meaning we'll likely start Thanksgiving week with most of the country dealing with above average temperatures, which you can see in all the oranges, reds, and yellows on your screen. As we move into Tuesday, it's more of the same. But then we get to Thanksgiving Eve, November the 26th. It looks like some colder than average temperatures start to creep in. Just think of these blues and greens as a sign of that chillier weather. Let's not get too focused on exactly how as cold it will be just yet because we're still a ways out, but we'll get more detailed on that as we get a little closer each day. But as we head into the middle of the week, around the 26th, that cold front looks to be dropping right across the middle of the country. And by the way, we're looking at the Euro AI model, which I think has done a really good job over the last several days of sniffing out this first cold front. It picked up on it first. It could be wrong, but we'll figure that out this week, right? I think it's really locking into this idea. As we push into Thanksgiving Day, November the 27th, it looks like a whole lot of cold air is dropping into the center of the country. Now, are we talking about an extreme, stinging Arctic blast or record-breaking cold? I don't think so. But those green shades, that's anywhere from 10 to 15, and in some cases, 20 degrees below average. So, if your average high for Thanksgiving Day is 60 degrees, you might be looking at highs in the 40s or so. As we continue to move forward, this cold front looks to make its way all the way into the eastern U.S. By the time we get to the last weekend of November, look at this cold air showing up. Now, this is just one model run, but that is a lot of cold air suddenly appearing for the central and eastern U.S. It's funny, just a couple of days ago, it looked like this period was going to be locked in with warmer than average weather for the eastern U.S. to end November. Now it looks like a pretty stout, potent cold front is moving in. As we round out the last couple of days in November, we're still seeing those below average temperatures. But if you look at the last day of the month, this could be dangerously cold if it's correct. You see those deep purple Barney colors? I mean, folks, that's 25 to 30 degrees below average. This is true Arctic air. So it looks like another cold front at the very end of the run, about 14 or 15 days from now, is dropping down, and this one might be the real Arctic hammer. We'll talk more about that as we go. The actual operational Euro model shows this too, starting off Thanksgiving week with well above average temperatures for most of the country, and then you can see that cold air move in. Now, the Euro wants to spill this more across the western US, while the Euro AI model kind of skips the west and goes right for the middle of the country. But for Thanksgiving, for example, it looks like most of the central and eastern US, aside from the northeast, will be dealing with warmer than average temperatures, while a lot of cold, even Arctic air settles across the western US. Now, once we get through to the last week in November, it does look like a big cold front begins to sweep across the country. This is very cold air, with some very cold anomalies showing up here 10, 20, even 25 degrees below average. That cold front does make it all the way to the southeast and eastern US, but it's definitely a few days slower than the Euro AI model. The models, however, are really locking in on the idea of this first cold front. Now, let's switch to the GFS model. It has a similar idea, though the timing this far out won't be perfect. It shows warmer than average temperatures across most of the country to start. We take it all the way to Thanksgiving Eve, and it's kind of a middle ground scenario. Then we get into Thanksgiving Day, and the GFS is just plain warm. It doesn't show a lot of cold air. I mean, you see some blues, but that's only a few degrees below average. It eventually gets a cold front going, but it just flat out skips the western and central US and goes right toward the eastern US. So, when we get all the way out to that last Friday of the month, November the 28th, we finally have below average temperatures sweeping across the country. And then, at the very end, kind of like what the Euro AI model is showing, it depicts Arctic air spilling down into the western and then the central US as we end November. The last evening of the month shows a big, powerful cold front starting to dig down and progress eastward. We'll talk more about December in a second. So, what's the takeaway? Well, if we look at the Euro ensemble here, which is one of the best tools you can use, it shows Thanksgiving evening as a major temperature battleground. We've been talking about this a ton. It's happening right smack in the middle of the country for Thanksgiving. It's cold in the west, it's warm in the east, and this is the dividing line of a pattern change. So what do you take from all this? Well, I think model guidance is really starting to lock in on a cold front toward the end of the month, sometime during Thanksgiving week. How cold is this cold front? How chilly is the air it's going to bring? That's a big question we're still figuring out. What's the exact timeline? We've got to nail that down too. And another thing I take from this is that there's another cold blast following it, and I think that one could bring a lot of seriously cold air. Now, the official 6 to 10 day temperature outlook from the experts isn't reflecting much of this yet. It's going with near normal to below average temperatures across the western US between the 22nd and the 26th, so in the days leading up to Thanksgiving. And then, the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, which covers the Thanksgiving period all the way through the last week in November, shows below average temperatures out west and above average temperatures in the east, with a battleground of both right in the middle of the country. I think some of this blue will start to push much farther east in the next couple of outlooks, starting today into tomorrow. We'll see what happens. So, are there any significant storm systems in this time frame? I think there will be one. I just don't know how high impact it's going to be. We've got to figure that one out. Well, if we look at the Euro, check this out. Starting off Monday and heading into Tuesday, it does show some weather down here in the south-central US. Some rain, maybe some storms. We'll sort out the details as we go. This system kind of slips through over the weekend and gets squashed by high pressure, and then watch what comes roaring off the Rockies. This is an all-out blizzard on the model. Check it out, man. This is Thanksgiving evening, a 992 millibar low exploding off the Rockies. That is a deep low-pressure system, so all this blue could be a potential blizzard. I'm not saying that's the forecast, but watch out. It gets down to a 989 as we're getting into Friday, the 28th. Look at this heavy snow. A clash of air masses, it makes sense. It fits the upcoming pattern. We could very well get thunderstorms, even severe weather, on the south side of this low, but it's 282 hours out, so it's very far in the future. I'm just monitoring this active pattern, and that is the big storm the Euro is showing. Let's get a closer look at this for my family and friends out here in the middle of the country. I mean, check this out. This is getting into Thanksgiving night and the day after Black Friday. Ooh, that would be a party crasher right there for any Black Friday shoppers, if that's even really a thing anymore. Most people do their shopping online now, but 989 millibars, that's a blizzard right there, something to watch. It then progresses into areas in Minnesota, Iowa, and then the upper Midwest. So, what about the Euro AI model? Let's see if we've got the latest 06Z run, and we do, so we're good to go there. You know, this is just going to show precipitation, and we'll have to fast forward all the way to Thanksgiving week. But it does show something similar to the main Euro, a system down here in the Southern Plains and Southern Rockies. We'll have to watch this. This is Monday, the 24th. But does it show what the main Euro is showing with that big system coming off the Rockies? No, it just shows some Clipper-type energy, with a system still down in the southeast. This is Thanksgiving Eve, but it doesn't show anything high impact, so that's something to watch. But it does show another big cold front at the very end with a lot of colder air dumping down. Now the GFS, what does it show? It does show a storm system around Thanksgiving Eve, but it's a weak low pressure, so that would not be a high impact storm. Then, as we get into Thanksgiving night and the day after, it shows a low pressure developing off the southeast and eastern US. This could be something to watch as we get into the last week in November. It gets down to 993 millibars, but there's not a lot of cold air to work with, and it kind of moves into the cold air later on, so we'll have to see. So, in general, I think between now and the last day of November, a lot of precipitation has a chance to fall across this whole area of the country, from the Southern Plains to the Mississippi Valley, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, the Mid-South, western parts of the Deep South, and even into the Northeast. Now, this accounts for what's going to happen between now and next Monday, which I didn't really talk about. I think most of this precipitation down here will be rain, okay? But what about the snow? I think out west, you're going to have opportunities to get a lot of higher elevation snow between now and the end of the month. Several inches worth. But even after you get past the higher mountain ranges, it looks like that snow potential starts to show up here to the east also. So, let's switch maps. This is starting off on Monday morning. Okay, the 24th, the beginning of Thanksgiving week. Watch how this gap up here fills in. As we move all the way into Thanksgiving and the days after, and then take it all the way to the evening of November the 30th, all of a sudden this area fills up. That symbolizes that pattern change to a more winter-like pattern with colder air and snow chances. And it fills in very fast, pretty much from the beginning of Thanksgiving week all the way to the end of November. Between now and then, from now until next Monday, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot. Now, if you're looking up here across the eastern US, I just don't think there's going to be much of a winter-like pattern between now and pretty much the end of the month. But starting next Monday, there is a little signal right here. This is really for the next 48 hours. We'll talk about that when we go over the daily forecast at the end of the video. But, taking it all the way through the end of the month, guys, I mean, you don't see much, maybe a little lake effect snow action, just a little signal. Pattern between now and pretty much the end of the month, but things start to get interesting next Monday with a little signal popping up right here. This is really a short-term thing within the next 48 hours, and we'll dive into that during the daily forecast at the end of the video. But honestly, looking at the big picture for the rest of the month, guys, there isn't much to see besides a little lake effect snow action across the Ohio Valley and the Mid-South, but nothing major there. This is all backed up by the 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook covering the 22nd through the 26th. If you live in the green area, that's where models are favoring above average precipitation. So, this is where they're expecting a higher than not chance for rain, or, in some cases, snow. And then we move to the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, which takes us from the 24th to the 30th. Most of the country is leaning towards a chance of above average precipitation. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about what everyone's been asking about. Starting with November 1st, my mistake, December 1st. There's a lot of chatter about what's going to happen in December, so let's get into it. Let's kick things off with the end of the Euro ensemble for December 1st. It shows a big trough over the central to western US. This area in blue represents a trough of low pressure, which supports a stormier pattern and drags down colder air from the Arctic region. So if I draw on this for a moment, let's make it in black. Alright, we have a ridge spiking up here and some blocking action up north. Cold air is going to plunge down into this dip in the jet stream, and this will likely spawn storm systems. There's a bit of a ridge flexing over the southeast, which will nudge into the eastern US, and probably keep most of the southeast warmer than average to start December, aside from a cold front we need to watch. So just think of the blue. Now, this is the pattern at 500 millibars, way up in the atmosphere, but you can think of the blue as a source for colder temperatures and a stormier pattern. It doesn't always translate perfectly to the surface, but most of the time it does. So as we continue to the end of the run, you can see that blue area positioning itself more over the middle of the country. So just think of the blue. Now, this is the pattern at 500 millibars, way up in the atmosphere, but you can think of the blue as a source for colder temperatures and a stormier pattern. It doesn't always translate perfectly to the surface, but most of the time it does. So as we continue to the end of the run, you can see that blue area positioning itself more over the middle of the country. US. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, it means we'll likely start December warmer and perhaps a bit drier in the eastern US. The western and central US will probably be colder. And when you see this blue area extending this far up into Canada, that tells me we're tapping into a cold air source straight from the Arctic region, which can be some seriously cold air because it's coming from the Arctic. Sometimes you get cold air from the Pacific, but it's not as cold and doesn't pack the same punch. This setup supports everything I just mentioned, blasts of true Arctic air. I think we could get multiple rounds of it because of a disruption in the polar vortex known as a sudden stratospheric warming, or SSW for short, and we have a lot of warming in the upper levels of the Arctic region. You can see this big blob of orange, red, white, and pink. Just think of this as a bubble of warm air high above the Arctic, and when this happens, it disrupts the polar vortex, dislodging cold air to the south. This is set to start around Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, and I do think we'll have a big warming event up there then. And then we could have a reinforcing warming event. I think this will be a maximum warming event as we get into the last couple of days of November. You can see these much warmer than average temperatures in Celsius anomalies centered over this area of the Arctic. This is probably going to unleash a lot of Arctic air, even as we're getting into December, with this first wave pushing a lot of Arctic air, and then this one right here could push even more. So if we follow this, let's extend the forecast deeper into November. This picks up where we just left off with all the other ensembles at the very end, 360 hours out, which takes us pretty much to December 1st. You can see things begin to shift as we get a few days into December. This pattern really carves out a deep bowl here. So at this point, as we're getting into, say, the first Saturday of December, around the 6th or 7th, things are locking in. A lot of cold air is coming down with this trough, and there's a little bit of a ridge flexing over the southwest. To me, this is likely going to bring cold air more so to the central to the eastern areas of the country. How far south does it get? I'm not quite sure, but you can see how the orientation of this trough shifts to look more like this. It's exactly what it's showing here, and this thing is broad, folks. This really tells me a lot of Arctic air is dropping down. The question is, where does it drop down, and how far south does it go? I think it's a huge deal. But as we continue, it looks like as we start to get into the mid-December timeframe, a ridge begins to build out in the west, maybe a bit of what we call positive PNA ridging. And we start to see more of these blue areas, lower heights, colder temperatures, and a stormier pattern positioning itself over the eastern US as the ridge builds out west. And as we're getting into the week leading up to Christmas, it could really introduce a very winter-like pattern. I know a lot of people are talking about the December 10th to December 15th timeframe, where things could really begin to shift, and I have to say, the Euro Weeklies really support this. If you're a winter weather fan in the southeast like me, you know you want to see these blues extend down here, but keep in mind, this is just the Euro Weeklies, alright? You've got the ridge here, this deep dip here, with the trough diving down, bringing cold air. We could get some type of active storm track going like this, right at the base of this trough. That's something we have to watch out for, but I think active times are ahead for the eastern US. It's just a waiting game. And regarding temperatures, if we look at the Euro Weeklies here, starting with the first couple of days of December, you can see the blue, which is below average temperatures, begin to seep into areas of the Midwest, upper Midwest, and the Northeast, while we're still hanging on to above average temperatures across the deep South as we get several days into December. But as we get into that mid-month time frame, you're starting to see more of the blues showing up over the eastern US and a little bit farther south. And as we get closer to Christmas, during that week leading up to it, you're starting to see just flat out more of the blues showing up over the eastern US. I'm telling you, there is a high ceiling for December's potential, and I really think it can be achieved for the eastern US, especially as we get closer to Christmas. So yeah. And then you look at precipitation, guys, and you look at the pattern starting off in December. And we go from December 1st through the entire month, and you can see where the yellows and the oranges appear. That's where we have a better than not chance of precipitation. You can tell how that begins to shift into the eastern US as we get about 10 days into December. So, what this tells me here is we've got an active storm track across the eastern US, with a pattern that supports colder than average temperatures moving into that active storm track across the eastern US. It's kind of leaving the middle of the country behind. So you have above average precipitation setting up for December, especially later in December across the eastern US. You have a trend towards colder temperatures. You're probably going to get shots of winter weather deeper into December, and it could stick around for the rest of the month. So, looking at the central US, this is between now and the next 15 days, right? That's your signal. We've already shown you this. Now, this is going past 15 days. This is going 32 days out. You see that big difference here. You might think, well, it's winter, that's going to happen, and I would agree with you. But we're here to talk about the specifics of winter, right? Just because it's winter doesn't mean we don't talk about cold and snow. That's one of the weirdest comments I see. But look, 15 days versus 32 days, big change, right? For the eastern US, the next 15 days look pretty quiet except for favored areas. And then you extend this from the 1st of December all the way to the middle portion of the month, and it's a huge change, right? All right, and then we extend this 46 days, which pretty much takes us all the way through December. That's a big change right there. Look at that, it really begins to drop south. In fact, this is probably one of the better Euro Weekly runs that we've had over the last several days. And a big factor that we've talked about is this MJO, right? This is the part that can confuse people, but I'm gonna keep it as simple as possible for you, and let's make sure we've got it right. So, this is a driver in the atmosphere, MJO pulses, things like that. All right, let's start over to make this clear. These phases right here, 7, 6, 5, and 4, these are generally warm phases. Phase 7 will be a factor for areas of the country, and we're about to really fully enter Phase 7 over the next couple of days. As we get past this messy transition, we could still get shots of cold air, especially for the northern areas of the lower 48. And in phases 4, 5, and 6, we can still get shots of cold air. We just saw one early last week, right? So just because we're in these warmer phases doesn't mean we can't get cold air. But I can tell you phase 6, which we're in right now, is a really warm-dominated phase for the entire lower 48, which is exactly what we're experiencing for the most part right now outside the Northeast and a couple of small areas of the country. So if you look here, it says 6, 8, 10. These are days in November, right? The black line here is November. Everything gets jumbled up right in here, and this looks to be locked in. We're just going to get a jumbled up mess for a bit. It looks like the MJO is going to struggle to get from phase 6 to 7, okay? Now, you see this 29 right here? That is November the 29th. And what we're going to do here is see if we have an updated version of this. And we don't. So, still, the run from the 15th, that's fine. All right, so you see the 29th. That's at the end of this month. At that point, we're going to fully begin to enter phase 7. That number 1 right there, that's December the 1st. So from the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th, that's our path through December. Then we get to phase 8, 1, 2, and 3. These are the colder phases. Phase 8 is the sweet spot for major cold. A real wintry pattern setting up, especially for December, and it looks like we're going to ease our way, slow and steady, into phase 8 as we get to about the middle of the month. This really opens the door for widespread cold and chances for some winter weather, even stretching down into the south. So the potential is there, folks, it really is. With phase 8 and phase 1 in the mix, we could just ride this MJO pulse out for a good long while. We could ride this wave through those prime phases, right through the most favorable time of year for this stuff. We're talking late December, when the days are shortest, and maybe even into early January or beyond. We have a shot at just letting this pattern simmer through one of the absolute best windows for winter weather all year. The key is, we've got to be patient. We have to get through phase 7 first over the next several days, which might take up the first 10 days of December. So yeah, patience is the name of the game, and this setup is exactly why most of the country is going to feel pretty warm for the better part of the next 2 weeks, though that'll vary depending on where you are. For some, it might just be a week. We'll keep an eye on that. All right, now for today's weather, folks, let's get this map moving. Yep, we've got snow across parts of the Northeast, with many of you waking up to some festive flakes flying around. That's thanks to some troughing in place and a little cutoff low spinning over the far western US right along the west coast. We're still seeing a persistent funnel of moisture streaming into California and the surrounding areas. Meanwhile, the middle of the country, the southeast, and that whole southern tier, it's pretty much a dead zone for any active weather. Looking at the alerts, we've got winter weather advisories in purple and winter storm warnings posted for parts of New England. We also have some dense fog advisories, scattered around the country, plus more winter weather and wind alerts out west. As for thunderstorms today, we're not expecting anything too wild, but a few strong storms are still on the table. That light green you see indicates a general risk, and we're seeing the same thing down in the southwest, where there's also a risk for some flash flooding. So yeah, if you're in LA or anywhere in Southern Cal, you've got to keep an eye out for flash flooding in that zone. Over in the southeast today, it's just beautiful weather, nothing crazy happening, and it continues to be incredibly dry. It's like this area has forgotten how to make rain these days, at least right here where I am in South Carolina, but I bet a lot of you can relate. All right, we're going to keep watching this trapped low-pressure system up in Canada. It's just going to keep feeding active weather into the region, and we could still see some lake-effect snow bands streaming off Lakes Erie and Ontario through the evening hours. Honestly, this could hang around all the way into tomorrow. Then, we've got a new system moving in, and this one could be a little tricky, with the potential for some heavy, wet snow. It'll be tapping into some lingering cold air, but that's a story mostly for tomorrow. Down in the south-central US, there's a push of moisture, but you're too far south of the main storm track, so expect another quiet day. The north-central US, however, is in for some action. A low-pressure system is moving in, and you can see that moisture surging northward later tonight, and I really believe this is going to run into just enough cold air, especially as we head from tonight into tomorrow. That's why you're seeing these blues and pinks pop up a wintry mix with some heavy snow, maybe some sleet, or a little freezing rain. But I think snow will be the main story. You can definitely see this band of what I expect to be some pretty heavy snow ready to greet folks tomorrow morning in parts of southern and central Minnesota, and maybe even into lower Michigan. I really think this could drop a slushy few inches of snow. In fact, the snowfall forecast for southern Minnesota near Rochester is calling for maybe an inch or two over the next 48 hours. And then if you look over in Wisconsin, Madison could see an inch or two, Janesville about an inch, and La Crosse is looking at an inch or two as well. So we could certainly get a little accumulation out of this system. Then we drop down into Michigan, where a dusting or some slushy amounts are possible. Out west, a ton of moisture is pouring into California, bringing rain to the lower elevations and snow to the higher terrain. Temperature-wise, it's very cold in the northeast, which remains locked firmly in winter's grip. The southeast is on the chillier side, as some cold air filters in, making for a brisk start. It's 39 degrees at my house right now. That's after an 80-degree day yesterday. The deep south is warm, while it's chilly across the northern tier of the country. The south-central U.S. is warmer, but it's a bit cooler across the western U.S. It definitely feels like an extension of summer out there in the southern plains. But that's the weather scoop for now. Let's go ahead and make this our timestamp, and we'll jump into a quick Bible devotion. I'm running a little behind schedule, so let's get right to it this morning. We're in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. It says, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets." The golden rule, right? So I wrote down, treat others the way you want to be treated. We've all heard that a million times, haven't we? This is a core standard for Christian living, but it really should be a standard for just living in general, you know? It's about living a life that is pleasing to God. We're called to hold ourselves to a higher standard of love for everyone we meet in our daily lives. And this is a command, not just a friendly suggestion. I truly believe that by default, most of us are inherently selfish, and the only way to really combat that is to constantly strengthen our relationship with Jesus. And the more you do that, the more you'll want to do it. I know that sounds a bit like a tongue twister, but it's absolutely true. The more you practice doing the right thing and living in a way that pleases God, the more you'll desire it and the easier it becomes. And the only way you're going to naturally want to do it more is by deepening that relationship with Christ. Now, some people are just naturally nice. Others have this drive to go all out in everything they do, always striving for perfection, and sometimes that can even work against you. But whatever the case, everybody has things they struggle with and things they're really good at. But anyway, it's a command, guys. Think about it this way. Here's an example from my work in customer service. Sometimes people come in and they're in a really tough spot. They desperately need a part for their truck. And as they're explaining their whole situation, I often already know the answer before they're even done. I know I can't really help them much because the specific part they're looking for isn't something we supply. I can't even look it up because it's what's called an OEM part. You have to get it directly from the truck's manufacturer. And honestly, to get out of the conversation quickly, I could just say, "Nope, we don't carry that. Sorry, buddy, can't help you." And sometimes I've done that and I feel bad about it. But lately, and especially over the last couple of years as I've strengthened my relationship with Christ, I really try to help the person out. I'll try to give them the phone number for the place where they times get it. Heck, sometimes I'll even call the dealer for them and say, "Hey, they have the part, they're holding it for you, just go over there and pick it up." You know, that simple act can relieve so much stress for them, because they're probably already going through a super stressful situation. Something might have broken on their truck, and we shouldn't just give them the cold shoulder, right? And just say, "Yeah, we don't have it. Have a good one. Bye." So that's just one small example from my daily walk in the job that I do. But anyways, that's all I've got for you today. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. God bless all of you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll do this all over again tomorrow morning.